For those that weren't here when I first mentioned it, what we're trying to do is tailor tonight's presentation a little bit to what you guys are looking to get out of this evening. So on your mobile phones, smartphones, if you wouldn't mind visiting menti.com, menti.com, and use the code 733518. Just let us know a few short words about what you're trying to get out of this evening to help us to help you guys. We've still got a couple of minutes to go, but we'll get started shortly.
Everyone else has been Brexit, yeah.
70.
70.
Yeah.
You want to just hit your face, mate, around it?
Well, the Adams, I'll just take a few notes, go through it and tell you guys.
Yeah.
Got something to say.
I will say, just before we choose those properly while I'm eating an apple, there's quite a few words in here that do strike with the presentation that Joe and I have produced. So hopefully we've actually tailored it.
It's like we know what we're doing.
Contractor and consultant. It's probably, there are quite a few things in there that are kind of that we've got within the presentation to kind of talk about, and we do want it to be, hopefully, not too worried about time, but we do want it open and discussion about the sort of subjects that we bring up. It would be useful to kind of get people's opinion.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this event, the last CPD event of this calendar year. Just a few notices then. If you hear the fire alarm, it will be the real thing, so make your way that way. This is an unusual event. It's a roundtable discussion rather than just a presentation. So as I just mentioned, it's a two-way event, so feel free to dive in when that. Presentation, roundtable discussion on digital technology. So it's presented by Adam Selby and Joe Lowe.
So, right, I'm Adam Selby. I'm the Building Services Design Excellence Lead for Ramboll in the UK. These are a few of the projects. Some people know some of these projects, but these are a few of the projects I've worked on. And really, this was done back in 2008, and it's kind of where we started to use some Revit and digital techniques in the project, but all the way through to my latest project, which is working across borders with Spanish consultants, German structural engineers, Spanish architects, UK architects, to deliver an arena related.
Hello, I'm Joe Lally. I work for Crown House. So the plan here is to have, coming in from both sides, from the consultant world and the contracting world. These are some of the jobs that I've worked on. So right now I'm at Crown House, and we get heavily involved in DFMA, so obviously coordination being a key part of that. Everything needs to be right if we're going to manufacture stuff. But prior to that, I was an associate at BDP, so I've seen it from both sides, working on some of these jobs, and I've been coordinating on part of as part of the consulting team, but also now coordinating as part of the contractor team.
So what are we trying to achieve? And this is a statement taken from BG6. Hopefully people have read BG6. We might not necessarily read all the documents on a regular basis to understand what's within them, but I think it goes to show that we've moved and transitioned from a 2D world, and three of us were having a bit of a heated discussion on this earlier on, but we've moved from a 2D world into a 3D world. In the 2D world, we used to accept clashes. Yeah? Not all clashes, but we used to accept clashes. because there was a degree of interpretation of the drawings, the stuff that could be delivered and finished on site. Yeah, but we moved into a 3D world, and those clashes get brought to everybody. So just hands up if you feel like when you worked on a 3D job that you've ever been like smashed over the head with a clash detection report, because I would say I have. Yeah. So that's the premise of this. We're trying to see how we can kind of work together better to try and work out and not be smashed over the head with a clash detection report every time on a job. So we've got some example clashes, some standards we use, as we said, some guidance in the work stages, some more example clashes and a summary. So I think hopefully we'll go through. So what is the industry like? So this is always an analogy that the chair of the SDE always uses, and I use it in life but slightly differently, is we've got two scientific sci-fi genres that we like. People either like either Star Trek or Star Wars. Star Trek is a very ordered, very everything works. You walk onto the spaceship, the doors open, and they close. Everything's brilliant. Yeah. Or is it Star Wars, which is a bit more apocalyptic, a bit more tribal, a bit more kind of adversarial, and we make things out of a piece of junk, and Chewie's trying to actually mend the Millennium Falcon just before it needs to jump to light. So where does construction sit? But we can think, as we talked before, is the BIM lead person that's employed on the job who's doing the clash detection report just kind of using that as a kind of like to really overpower everybody? But they think we live in a perfect world. We don't. Yeah? We live in a world where nothing's perfect. These are a few of my jobs, obviously. But, and then as Joe and I always have a chat, well, we always often forget we've got this perfect BIM model that everybody aspires to, and we forget what's on site.
Someone hitting stuff with a big hammer.
Yeah. So we've got some example clashes to kind of think this through, and it's just really like an open now discussion of these things. Is this a clash? Is this wrong?
You may want to explain it. What people are
So at the moment we've got a load of smoke detectors, lights floating in the middle of nowhere. Ceiling devices floating in the middle of nowhere.
Should we have a
You
vote?
asked two questions there. I'll take you up on that.
Go on then.
You said, is it a clash and is it wrong?
Yeah, okay.
The answer is no, yes,
Okay.
in that order.
So you could argue, depending on what you're using the model for and how you're actually going to convey that information, if that's a 2D plan and you're just issuing it out the door, it's not wrong or a clash.
Yeah.
Because if you're doing is viewing the 2D element to install the drawings, it doesn't really matter that those are floating to some extent. But everybody's running around. I do agree that in a 3D model, when you look at it, drawn, it's bad working practice. Yeah. But just because it's bad working practice doesn't make it wrong.
Yeah. I think it also it depends what stage of the project you're at as well. You know, if we're at construction, we're trying to build that. You need to define what the purpose of the BIM model is, I think.
Yeah. Is that a clash? So you can see there, the duct comes through a hole. The hole's really big, but the ducts.
What's the context? What's the stage?
Even at the stage, let's say stage 4, and even if you're trying to some extent you're trying to build it, yeah, for an as-built it might be wrong, because you wouldn't be able to install it like that.
But the reason
actually
I
on
ask
site,
is prior to fabricators coming on board, some structural consultants weren't setting holes out.
yeah,
And I would say stage 4A, perfectly acceptable. And I think I'll say a bit go, because I'll be shocked by it.
yeah,
Because I'm going to hold me.
yeah,
I think that the thing that we've got to do is to make sure that the contractor and the architect in equal measure have a sensible expectation of what they're paying us for.
yeah, yeah.
Because what we, as consultants, speaking to the consultancy platform, what we're not doing is producing installation drawings. Unless we are contracted to produce installation drawings, and there will be those exceptions. But in general, we're not. And we haven't got the fee or the time.
We'll come to scope and fee in a second, because so all these are probably a bit more difficult to see. These are again some floating smoke detectors, and also some conduits that are kind of like not in the wall and they should be in the wall. So you could argue probably the one on the right hand side is clashing. One's in the back. Next.
Question I would ask, are we prepared to defend ourselves? If we issue these models and we get hit over the head with a clash report, are we actually geared up to respond and win the argument, not just respond?
I think, can I just ask a question? You talk a lot about clash detection, but a lot of that's just coordination. And so, for the rest of the evening, is this purely clash detection, or is this coordination?
It's a mix of both. So it's a mix of clash detection and coordination are combined. Yeah. So you may find that if we went back to the one where the hole was through there, that's both clash detection and coordination. Yeah. The question really we have is how armed, as Andrew's saying, how armed do you feel to be able to hold your ground and not be whacked over the head with a bin model that someone produces a list that says you've got 500 clashes in here, and then you spend your time running round chasing the mythical clashes, which then also has a problem, because a clash really isn't just, as you rightly said, a clash just isn't necessarily, and we've got some good images later on, a clash isn't necessarily an MEP problem. But because the MEP clashes in everyone's mind, because the MEP clashes with the steelwork, yeah, it might well be the hole's in the wrong place. So we're all familiar. We all work to the RIBA work plan, fairly standard and laid out. But BG6, obviously from an MEP perspective, a lot of people in structures and in architecture say that this is actually a lot better, a lot more detailed, and a lot more robust than what they have. But it's backed up by, and I didn't read this until recently in its whole, it's backed up by ACE scheduler services. And I recommend everybody to just pick it up and read the ACE scheduler services, because it's quite interesting about some of the things we do that aren't standard. So here's a question. It says here what the AC say about clashes, and it says for technical design, provide a technical design stage information that demonstrates resolution of all clashes between architecture, structure and all services where they have a material impact on construction, operation or maintenance of the work. I'm going to ask the question because ACE gives it in like a base services and optional services. For stage 4, is this base or optional? So hands up if you think it's what we should be doing as standard.
Stage 4 in 2018 terms being 4C.
Yeah, well, just state it, there isn't a split in ACE, 4C or 4B or whatever. There's just stage 4 in ACE terms. So do we think this is what we should be doing as standard? It's not. It's an optional service. Yeah. So it just goes to show is our perception of because we're not picking up our documents on a regular basis to read them, and I'll explain something in a bit when we do get to stage 4.
What BG6 says.
I'll come to BG6 and talk about how that sits because we've got comparisons of each stage to try and talk through some of these things. So again, BG6 gives guidance. We talked about the 2D to 3D in there, and it defines a clash as two elements, obviously in the same space, not requiring not being installation or maintenance allowed. So you don't necessarily pick a clash up in a clash detection report if you haven't got the maintenance space. But BG6 is saying it has a clash against it. We used to, hopefully this is pretty good in terms of the amendments that were made by the BG6 guys when they wrote the digital elements into it, but it talks about clashes in critical, moderate and allowable. Yeah, and that's useful as a tool for you to kind of stand behind because it gives you those sorts of descriptions against them. Yeah. It gives you a bit of a guidance about the typical types of clashes you're going to get at each individual stage and whether they're acceptable or not acceptable. But one of the things we kind of forget when we talk about the site stuff is our family are all plumbers, electricians and everything else, and they were they always interpret a set of drawings traditionally, and we talked about whether you've got DMFA and that gives a slightly different spin on things, but they always, a plumber or electrician or a fitter took a set of drawings, 2D plans, and interpreted them. So you wouldn't necessarily get exactly what was drawn on the layout because the layout might be slightly different to the constraints that are on site.
Well, it's still happening now, even though you spend all this time doing the drawings, there's still some artistic license by the guys on site, so you spend all that time, sometimes you don't even necessarily follow what's on the drawings.
But is that our fault, or should the
No,
contractors
I'm not saying it's just, it's still, we're sort of,
better?
yeah, well, we're getting into this world where we're spending all this effort coordinating these BIM models, and then like that image before, then those drawings go out onto a building site with a guy with a hammer and a muddy building site, so I think we just need to sort of focus our, sort of rein it back in again, look at the standards and sort of think about what's important and, put the right people, the right place, the right time.
Yeah.
Focus on what's important.
And that design, let's call it design that the Sparkies and the plumbers and everybody else was doing, of routing stuff and making interpretation of those drawings, we're almost trying to, with a BIM model, we're almost de-skilling some of that, because if you're trying to tell them, well, you've got to install it that way, and it might not be the best way in that situation. Concept design, it's fairly straightforward. So ACE, and this is where we said we've got the two different scales now. So ACE is asking for providing concept design information appropriate to spatial, geometric and object information. BG6 again talks about critical clashes. It doesn't talk about the other two levels of clashes. It talks about critical clashes being removed, and then federating the model. This is a useful table that's in ACE again, of the level of information that you're supposed to provide, what you're supposed to model, what you're not supposed to model contractually at the given stage, which we all know what it looks like because we've got an example on BG6 and examples of other rises. So, talking about clashes, is this a clash? And I'm going to purposely use something non-MEP in this instance. This is two structural columns in the middle of a corridor. You wouldn't pick any of that up in a clash model. So clash detection or clash resolution at the stage 2, I would argue, you don't want any clash, and this is when we talk about when it is relevant to start bringing in clash detection reports, you wouldn't be wanting to bring any clash detection reports or even use it at that early stage. However, I've seen BIM managers of sorts that are looking over a whole project multidisciplinary, still trying to bring in clash detection reports at this time.
This is a good example, I think, of the point you made. Is it? Are we talking about coordination? Are we talking about clash detection? That's a coordination issue.
It is.
Yeah.
But why have you modelled containment at stage 2? If for me, I would want to use clash detection at stage 2 to make sure the architects respected the plan space I said I needed and the riser allocation I needed, but I wouldn't be modelling stuff that.
That one I necessarily directly from a stage 2. It was the one I could find with limited amount of services on, and I just got something that showed a clash. There was something we wouldn't necessarily provide clash detection report, but it's more fundamental. If we hide behind a clash detection report or clash detection at that stage, we're not actually approaching design in a way that's actually going to get proper resolution. Because if the architect's not giving you the right plan reading, the architect's...
No, but it's covering your back, isn't it? How do you know what changes the structural engineers made? He might introduce some structural elements, have a significant impact on the functionality of your plan space.
Yeah, but because you're dealing with volumes, I'd argue that is in design workshops and resolution of the design from a coordination, rather than necessarily saying I've got a clash detection report that says you've hit your beam with my zone, or do you know what I mean?
I agree, and that sounds nice. How often does that happen adequately, and how often do people tell you about everything they change?
We don't, do they just slip it in last minute? 5 to 5 on a Friday, change the BIM model.
You can use things like 360, BIM 360, to actually then monitor people's changes that they may do to you. So even if they don't tell you, it will tell you that there's been 500 changes to this model, and so many of them are new, so many of them are modifications, and so many of them are
I think that's the point, isn't it? I think you're right, and really it needs to change, and everyone should be sort of collaborating and talking to each other. If the architect moves a plant room, you know, reorders it, or the structural engineer changes the steelwork, there should be a sort of forum for everyone to sort of talk about it. At the moment, the sort of everyone's guarded, aren't they, and sort of trying to screw each other over a little bit. So that's how I see it.
I think the big problem with that is, and I think you might talk about later on, is that it becomes very easy. On big projects in the past, it was always the case that you have a set of drawings, architectural structural drawings that you work into 2D would be a room full of guys all working on drawing boards, plus a solving instrument. And if the structural engineer came in and said, actually, guys, we need to change something, and it could little tweaks here, not worry about that, but maybe that there's a fundamental change of grid or whatever, because of whatever reason. But at that point, it would be with proper project management, it would be a point where someone would say, we've got an issue here, do we want to proceed, do we do an instruction for it? It's a whole project. The problem is now, everything happens so fast that drawings get changed. You're working with a new model gets set in, the BIM manager gets it, he loads it into your model, you're working away, there's people still working away, and they go, hang on, that column's I'll just shift a bit of that work or whatever. And an awful lot of time gets taken up in reactively changing things to something which may not actually be finally adopted.
We're going to move through stages as this presentation goes on. I wonder if this discussion's possibly better for the sort of stage
Change
element of this, and maybe move on for a
change
little bit.
control and the process of change control and the process of costing it has kind of gone out the window because everything happens so fast.
But at this stage of design, concept design, you're really playing with, you should be playing together to try and get the right integrated solution.
Yeah, can I just say very quickly, I think with, like you say, with the use of BIM, the trouble is that people are going into far too much detail too quickly. Trying to model everything, all the crossovers far too early in the process. I think just maybe take a step back and just early stages just work volumetrically so you can sort of adopt, with the ebb and flow of the design change. So that's probably just something.
And the question is can it be class free at stage 2? Debate about this, but I would argue not necessarily going to be class free at stage 2 because people don't necessarily give you the total envelope you need. So stage 3, again, space, volume, and you start to allow a little bit more detail on the major plant routes and space planning. But again, BT6 is only asking you to remove critical clashes in the design. Yeah. It's not asking you to remove every clash. Yeah. It accepts there will be clashes. Again, it tells you what you should be modelling. So obviously no terminal units, those sort of stuff again, which aligns with the drawings we get on BT6.
I can vouch for this one particularly. It's a really well drawn drawing.
It's a beautiful drawing.
It is, yeah.
So this is an example of where you look at this and you think, at this stage of design, is this a clash? The structural engineer has gone and drawn some structure, the architect's not got a door in the right place when this is evolving in the model, and the services as we run round now suddenly clash with a load of structure that wasn't there. Yeah? So at stage 3, is that a problem?
No, I think, in my view, as long as you can prove that your design is still feasible. So, for example, if you're putting services into a ceiling void,
Yeah.
and for example, they clash with each other, but they're feasible in the next stage to be coordinated, and
Yeah.
it's not going to affect the required space in the ceiling void, and then let's say the whole
Yeah.
height of the building. that's not a clash.
So if those doors can be moved and that structure, those services that currently clash with the structure can be pushed to the right, yeah, it's not a clash. But in a clash detection report, in a clash model being used at stage 3, it's a clash. Everyone sees it as an image, and someone looks at it and says, "Why have you done this?" So again, I don't necessarily think it's fully appropriate to be using clash detection reporting, a personal opinion, at this stage, because of exactly what you're saying there. You will get clashes. The question is have you looked through the model and seen where the stuff is and know how to resolve it? If you don't, then you've got critical clashes and you don't know what it's going to work like.
Does anyone disagree and think that these clashes aren't acceptable? It's like everything.
I think I wouldn't be proud of that. The question you asked earlier, would I be happy to stand in a meeting to defend it?
Yeah.
I think as a piece of multidisciplinary design, it doesn't really look great.
Yeah, bear in mind this is not this photo is not taken from a finalised stage 3 design. It's just taken from a moment and snapshot of people doing clash detection from the clash detection report, turning around and saying that's a clash.
At stage 3, in a project like that, I don't know what the project is, Adam. It looks like an arena in a public area of an arena. I'm guessing, but it's at that sort of stage where you can be showing this is the density of services in this area, Mr. Architect, Mr. Wire, and he can be going, yeah, okay, I don't want to see that. We'll introduce some bulkheads, and he's now got an idea. It's not finally the final thing, but he can be looking at that and looking at a way of how he could conceal that, and then you could work together to work out how you conceal it. It's at stage 3. It's a conversation point. It's not.
Yeah, and I think that's what we I think we miss. I think you're right there. Is a lot of the stuff needs to be, as a design team, you need to be getting together and talking through these issues and getting integrated design.
You shouldn't be criticising each other. You should be helping each other.
So is there a way to get to that conversation before you've invested the time in modelling all of that? Because there's a lot of work.
But I think what's happening with the time pressures, as which alluded to earlier, is that you've got people changing the structural grid because they need to do something to make it work, because they've realised that originally what they were doing doesn't necessarily quite work as efficiently, because in that instance they're supporting a hellishly load of plants, and you don't know there, they support a heavy plant, energy centre above the top of it. So they had to change the structural grid, but it changes and then cascades all this stuff out. And I think in the digital world, that's because of the 3D elements, we see this quite a lot, where one little thing over here cascades out and affects the architect, the structural engineer. So rather than be treating it as a clash, because it's a design thing you need to resolve, the interrelationship between those designs, it isn't a clash. It's the architect's got to do a bit, the MEP engineer's got to do it, and maybe even the structural engineer's got to do a bit to get back to a design that's a bit more coordinated.
I'm going to move on in a second, but just one thing to put in our minds as we go through this. What is the unspoken narrative? Imagine all the clashes we've seen as one project. What's the unspoken narrative that's going to the client with these acceptable clashes, but when the architects complain? And how do we defend ourselves against the perception that we're not doing a very good job, just as the project goes on? Just have that in your head.
Yeah, I mean this is just clashing going through a glazed area. It's the glaze in this instance. It's not actually that this, if you're doing it in a slightly different way, yes, it's clashing with the glass, but the services need to run through there, and the architect's not necessarily put the transom line down at that moment in time to enable you to put a solid panel across the top of it to run services through. But it could be used and framed in the narrative, as Andrew was just saying, it could be used in the narrative as, well, the MEP engineers have done a bad job because they've run it through glass.
No, but then there's the argument that the architect should also be reviewing our model, MEP models, and if they would spot something like that, they should discuss with the MEP engineer, and there be a solution. Like it's not, it's not like we should be doing all the coordination work, and they should be just giving a solution to play. It should be a two-way street.
There's something more fundamental than that. I mean, let's just think. Go back to that slide with the stuff going through the glass.
Yeah.
I mean, one would like to think that at the earlier stage, we're at stage 3 here,
Yeah,
stage 3, pushing towards